Welcome into the Tuesday Blogger Bowl Week 7 recap. Week 8 early look ahead lines. Dan is rocking his beautiful ECU purple hoodie. Don't worry, I got my shirt on.
There we
Home
go.
Sweet home to me. It's a little chilly to Dan on it, so I got a hoodie on his t-shirt. Apartment's a little chilly, but I wanted to make sure I showed it. My Tennessee Vols, Phil's Vols. Phil can't join us today, unfortunately. Started the new job. He's very busy. He'll still be with us,
but jerk.
Shout out Phil getting a new job. He'll be back with us in a little bit, but it's week 1, got a lot to go through. So I will just have to do the Vols gloating. I know he's bummed that he had to miss our Vols, the recap show of our Vols' biggest game of the year. But what a game! That it's rare that those games ever actually truly live up to the hype of what they should be, and that one 110% did. It was amazing.
Yeah. So if you've listened to us before, you know my mantra. If you only consume college football to find out who wins the college football playoff, you don't understand college football. Alabama still controls their destiny for the playoff. USC still controls its destiny for the Pac-12 and not out of the playoff conversation, but probably out, but they're not out of it. But does that matter at Tennessee? Does that matter in Salt Lake City? Tennessee had lost 15 straight times to Alabama, and only 2 of those games were close. But after 4 agonizing hours, a wobbly kick, perhaps by the grace of God, cleared the crossbar.
It was
a decade and a half of
literally that much
was washed away. The way that the Tennessee River is going to wash away the goalposts that were ceremoniously torn down, marched out of the stadium, and deposited into said river. Meanwhile, in the ultimate juxtaposition of college football programs, the glitz and glamour of the legacy brand that is USC, taking on the perpetual upstarts of Utah, a program that had to scratch and claw its way to respectability, and thanks to the shameless money grab of realignment, finally got its seat at the table and has thrived unlike anybody else in the era of realignment. They were down 14-0 early, but that crowd willed those players to make the plays they needed to win the game. This season's undoubtedly going to end with the most boring conclusion. Ohio State, Georgia, or Alabama will be the national champion. All we can hope for is that along the way we get a good semifinal or title game. But that is and always will be the least interesting part of the college football season every year, because days like Saturday showed us that the destination doesn't matter, particularly when the journey is so good. Tennessee 52, Alabama 49. Trivia for you. Do you know which team scored the most points ever in a game against Alabama? It was not Tennessee. But do you know which team scored the most points?
Yeah, I saw your graphic. Not graphic, but you tweeted. I'm blanking. I know Sewanee was in there.
Sewanee was second. Auburn
Campbell
was third.
one of them.
Who?
Campbell?
No, that was another.
You're
confusing some of the things that I've tweeted today.
No, you tweet a lot of college football stuff with small schools.
I tweeted.
I'm gonna be bummed when you tell me this, because I've seen your tweet with this a couple times, and I love the graphic, but I can't remember who it was.
That would be the biggest sign of how much college football in the South has changed over the last 100 years. Vanderbilt beat Alabama 78-0 in 1906. Tennessee's 52 points, the 4th most ever allowed by the Alabama Crimson Tide. I got a lot of thoughts on this, obviously, but since you and Phil have been singing Rocky Top, why don't you start us off with your thoughts on this game?
Well, Jalen Hyatt just caught another touchdown pass from Hendon Hooker, so that's a thing. It kind of went early a lot. It went how I thought it would, except towards the end when the tide started to turn, no pun intended.
Hey, I love that.
Kind of thought okay, this is kind of where it unravels. And there were a few chances that Tennessee had, could have just, crumbled a little bit down the stretch, and Alabama just wins by 10 points, 2 scores. And, we leave there still feeling kind of good about Tennessee, but they just kind of kept coming back. And even though they struggled to get to Bryce Young, they did just enough, and Alabama helped them out just enough. And that's honestly my biggest takeaway, outside of how good Hendon Hooker to Jalen Hyatt was. Not even how bad the Alabama defense or secondary was, because, Saban defenses are pro. There it is.
I forgot to do that earlier.
Time, but 16 penalties, 170 yards, was it?
I'll look up those numbers.
Game, I think we talked about it after the Texas game about Alabama being undisciplined and how that's a correctable, mistake, but a correctable area for a young team with a coach like Nick Saban. Hey, we're 6 weeks later. We're past the midway point in the season. You're at the midway point in the season. That still hasn't been fixed. In fact, it got even worse in a big time game. And was the last pass interference call kind of ticky tack? Sure, but there were some ticky tack pass interference calls on the other way around. So I think that just kind of evens things out. I was floored at not that Tennessee was able to score and put up points, because that offense is electric. The quarterback's really good. They have some talented receivers, even without Cedric Tillman. I was floored at how undisciplined Alabama was defensively, and again, just as a team with all the penalties they committed.
Yeah, it was 17 for 130 yards. I'm trying to see if there we go. Fewest penalties per game. So if we go to the end, Alabama has committed 66 penalties this season. That is the most in FBS. So the undisciplined element of the Alabama Crimson Tide, not something that we're used to seeing. Maybe I'm being a little contrarian here, but I don't think I am. Maybe I'm zigging when everyone else is zagging. But is it crazy to say that I'm more impressed by Bryce Young than I was by Hendon Hooker coming out of that game? Which is no slight against Hendon Hooker. He was awesome. He was awesome in that game.
I was watching the game with some buddies, and I was saying the same thing the whole time. I was rooting for Tennessee. I bet on Tennessee's money line. I'm one of the biggest Hendon Hooker fans outside of Knoxville, Tennessee in the country. I love watching him play. Bryce Young was the best player on the football field. He was electric. They could not bring him down. Every time they got close, he'd squirm out, not only throw it away, but find an open receiver somewhere. Him, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Latu. Was William Latu the tight end? All three of them. Cam Latu. I don't know why I want to say William. All three were. I thought all three of those guys played really, really good football games. But Bryce Young was just. To come back from a shoulder injury. I mean, it was the point where it was probably still hurting, but I believe they said he can't hurt it anymore. So like he's just going to play. So the shoulder was definitely still giving him some problems. He was electric. He was the best player on the football field. And I left even more impressed with Bryce Young than I was, because it seemed like you rarely say this about any player on Alabama or an Alabama quarterback. It seemed like he was kind of dragging that team to a win, and that they were going to get a win because of what he was able to do, despite Tennessee throwing all of their biggest punches.
Yeah. Just Hendon Hooker was awesome in that game, but he was throwing against air a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Who was the guy who I said was going to be the key for Alabama? It was Will Anderson, right? Yeah. Will Anderson had 3 tackles, half a tackle for a loss. Alabama as a team, 1 sack, 0 quarterback hurries. It has become kind of apparent that if you can neutralize Will Anderson in that pass rush, the secondary is just bang on average, which we're just also not used to seeing from Alabama. And I know conceptually Tennessee does things that are going to perplex a lot of teams, but oh man, that secondary.
There were a lot of Jalen Hyatt run up the seam, and the safety in a cover 3 just kind of like looked and was like, okay. Like yeah. one of the touchdowns, I think it was the last one he scored, was legit just a seam route to the inside. The safety just kind of like, oh, okay, hey, how you doing? Go ahead, I'll see you. It was very strange. You don't see that from an Alabama secondary.
It was bizarre. I think the other thing that was kind of interesting is I know we get prisoner of the moment with football, but the play sequencing for Alabama on their last offensive series was a little bit weird, because I don't love settling for field goals. I understand the idea that settling for a field goal with college kickers is not a good thing. I mean, Will Reichard's been really good.
Still college kicker.
My Joker origin story is going to be Will Reichard making every kick against Texas and then almost costing them the Texas A&M game and then missing the kick at the end of the Tennessee game. It's just like, oh, of course, that's how things go. I don't love settling for a field goal. However, when you have a player as good as Jahmyr Gibbs and you have 2 timeouts in that situation, I don't understand why at least one of those plays with 2 timeouts wasn't a run play.
I agree.
Like that
one of them was to Gibbs over the middle, but still, you like don't I think it was a little Texas route to Gibbs over the middle that he ended up dropping. But don't give him the chance to drop it. Jahmyr Gibbs had a fantastic football game too. He was able to do whatever he wanted on the ground. Just hand the ball off.
Yeah. There's the old saying, which needs to be amended. Only 3 things can happen when you pass, and 2 of them are bad. We need to amend that to 4 things can happen when you pass. 2 of them are bad, because we can add the badly underthrown but bailout pass interference call as one of those. But yeah, to that point, like throwing the ball there on all 3 downs is not the best strategy. I don't think if you have no timeouts, of course, like you're going to throw the ball. You don't want to risk that. Even with 1 timeout, you might not want to run the ball because you might need to save that one in case there's a sack or disaster or whatever. But when you've got 2 timeouts, to not run the ball there was very weird. Don't have much else to add to this particular game, although I will say this. we're not going to get a game in college football that's going to match the kind of the intensity, the narrative, everything involving the emotion of this game. However, I don't think it's an outrageous statement. And I steadfastly believe that while this game was the most interesting from that perspective that we're going to see in college football this year, I think Tennessee, Georgia is a more interesting game from an X's and O's perspective, from a styles make fights kind of game, because Georgia's got the kind of defense that might be able to limit Hendon Hooker in Tennessee. And if that's the case, how does Tennessee adjust? And if Georgia does struggle against Tennessee's offense, can Stetson Bennett go toe-to-toe with Hendon Hooker in a game where the SEC East is going to be on the line? So, like, from a chess match kind of perspective, I don't think what happened on Saturday was hugely surprising in terms of both offenses being able to move the ball kind of at will. We kind of thought that was going to be something that could happen. Obviously, the way that it played out was surprising and thrilling, and we're not going to get a better game than that this year in all likelihood. Would love for one late in the year, or would love for one in the playoff. Like, God knows we're long overdue for that. But if we don't, we can at least be appreciative of what happened in Knoxville. If not for an all-time great instant SEC classic, the best game of the day would have been Utah 43, USC 42. You have a social life, so I don't know what you're doing on Saturdays. I'm assuming you're leaving the apartment. Did you watch this game, or were you out and about on Saturday?
I was. It was a friend's birthday, but we were just at a bar watching college football. So I was still, while I wasn't out of the apartment, I had several TVs on in front of me. So yeah, I watched this one, and man, like, we had some quarterback. It was like both of these big games, we had some quarterback play. Like, some of those throws, both of those guys made. The touchdown throw from Rising at the end was awesome. Caleb Williams several times on the run. I mean, there were a couple. We talk about Caleb Williams getting lucky, and there were a couple where the one where he kind of scrambled out to the right and just kind of heaved one up in a throwaway and just happened to fall. I think it was into Mario Williams' hand for like the long gain. I don't think it was the touchdown, but got him down like the 4. I was like, okay. But for the most part, like, man, like, they were just putting some balls in spots that not many people can, and with the velocity that not a lot of people can put on them either. Just absolute precision from both of those quarterbacks. While the other game was a lot of taking advantage of bad defensive play, this one was more like these quarterbacks just made awesome throws, and they had to beat some good defensive play.
Yeah, Caleb Williams, 381 yards, 5 touchdowns.
That's
USC
it.
got their lucky turnover, and they still lost by a point. I don't ever want to hear anyone tell me that Alex Grinch is going to be a good head coach someday or is a great defensive coordinator, because the basically the legacy of the Lincoln Riley era now at 2 schools has become being undone by defensive failures in key situations. 1 tackle for a loss, no sacks for USC. I agree. Cameron Rising was super impressive. How about Dalton Kincaid? 16 catches on 16 targets, 234 yards and a touchdown. You can go read Bill Connolly's recap of the weekend on ESPN.com. I think you probably have to be an ESPN Plus subscriber, but nevertheless, he said put the stats out there, arguably the best performance by a tight end in college football in the last 2 decades. Just an absolutely incredible performance. They needed every single one of those catches, every single one of those yards. Utah took a bunch of haymakers early in the game. They were down 14-0, 21-7. I think they scored on 5 of their last 6 drives of the game. It's kind of a shame that we have to credit football coaches for doing the smart, sensible thing that's considered gutsy. But kudos to Kyle Whittingham for being smart and just going for 2 and trying to win the game at the end instead of trying to play for overtime. Pac-12 disaster class and officiating on the last drive, with them putting time on the clock that they shouldn't have on 2 separate occasions. Pretty interesting that they were trying to help out the team that's leaving the conference, but nevertheless. And then the final thing, hopefully Jordan Addison is okay. Went down with what probably was a knee injury.
Didn't look good.
But did you see, since you're clearly seeing what I'm tweeting, did you see the clip I tweeted this morning of Lincoln Riley?
Oh yeah, we're just like, okay, he's like, I gotta play to call. Like,
granted, they can't stop the game because it's on the sideline, but his second best player gets hurt. Like, his big impact transfer wide receiver, Biletnikoff winner, gets hurt. He's down on the sideline, writhing in pain, and Lincoln Riley just kind of looks at him. And he's like, all right, well, I got to go call another play.
You looked a second time. He's like, oh, maybe. Oh, no.
Yeah, and it just didn't seem all that concerned with his well-being there. But yeah, both teams it was everything we thought it was going to be. I said on Thursday, my lean was like, take the money line if you get a good price on Utah. I just don't know what the good price was going to be. And we can talk about how great of a win that was for Utah. They did not cover. I still don't think the game really matters a ton for USC in terms of what they hope to accomplish. Their last two games are UCLA and the mighty Fighting Irish. Do you know who their other three conference opponents are?
It's like nobody. It's Colorado, Arizona, and maybe Cal.
Yep, bingo. They know they play Arizona, then it's Cal and Colorado in some order. And maybe Arizona can frustrate them, but I highly doubt that. So
look, Arizona might be able to score some points early, but they'll end up losing.
Yeah, I mean that's probably an over
35.
Yeah, that's probably an over game, if anything. But Notre Dame, maybe if their defense is good, but highly unlikely that Notre Dame's offense can keep up. 11-1 is still very doable for USC right now. That obviously gets them into the Pac-12 championship game, and maybe even if they can beat UCLA, and then if it's Utah again and they get their revenge, I don't think they're out of the conversation for the playoff. But obviously, this loss hurts. They're
not out of it, but they need help.
Well, of course, like they need some help, but I don't think that they're out of it necessarily. Nevertheless, a game that we would probably be talking about is one of the best games of the season, had it not been going on at the exact same time as Alabama and Tennessee. TCU 43, Oklahoma State 40 in double overtime. The second time this year, Oklahoma State has had a sizable lead against a conference opponent and let the other team back in it. They won against Baylor, did not, and lost to a team that has a better offense in TCU. It was 24-7, but that was off of a field goal deep in TCU territory and on a touchdown on a drive that started in TCU territory. Excluding the kneel down at the end of regulation, the TCU defense held Oklahoma State to 25 yards on their last 4 drives of regulation. That unit really showed up late when they needed them to. So even though there were 83 points, the TCU defense was awesome late, helping them get the win. And a guy who was flying a little bit under the radar because TCU is not a big legacy program, but a guy you probably should be watching, Quentin Johnson, the wide receiver, 8 catches, 180 yards and a touchdown. He has 386 yards over the last 2 weeks, a tremendous playmaker to help Max Duggan out on that offense. And they've got a tough one coming up on Saturday as well.
Who does TCU have?
They have Kansas State at home.
Okay, and then Oklahoma State is hosting Texas, correct?
Correct.
Those are 2 really good Big 12 games. I'm excited to watch.
They are.
I don't know.
3:30 and 8 p.m. Eastern.
I just don't know how many times that I've kind of stopped doing it because I know a game like this always happens. But, like, when are we going to just Mike Gundy's teams always do this. There's always an inexplicable loss. He tried to do it earlier in the year at Baylor, was, held on one there, and then did it here. I mean, you're up 27-16 in the third quarter, and you get outscored. Was it 14-3 to close it out? I think it was 14-0 in the fourth quarter. Like, it's just, Oklahoma State is who we thought they were, and I credit TCU for coming back. That's a massive win for them, and it clearly puts them on the path to a Big 12 championship game. But it's, for me, and just the main story is Oklahoma State is still Oklahoma State. Like, they just can't really win the big one that they absolutely need to have. And I guess this one lost it a little bit earlier, but like last year was with the playoff. Last year, it was a Big 12 championship to get into the playoff. Every year before that, it's Oklahoma and Bedlam. This year, we got a chance to establish ourselves as the team in the Big 12. Nope, we're going to blow a double-digit second-half lead to TCU. It's frustrating to see Oklahoma State do this year in and year out. Also because those uniforms were just awesome too. They have great uniforms.
Yeah. I mean, it's tough. Their defense hasn't quite rebounded. We thought Derek Mason coming in, there wouldn't be a huge drop off from what Jim Knowles did last year with them, but there has been. They also lost some guys.
I was going to say, how much talent did they lose off that defense from last year? Decent amount?
They lost a bunch of guys from that defense, and then the linebacker who was on Hard Knocks that everyone loved was kind of like the emotional, spiritual leader and probably the best player on that defense last year, Malcolm Rodriguez. They're like, we talked about it with Utah. We've talked about it with Baylor. They're just not going to reload on defense the way other teams are. And hell, like we've seen, look, Alabama's even not immune to it. Like Alabama's secondary is not as good as it's been in the past. And eventually, like even Alabama can't year in and year out just put out a great secondary, a great defense. It's just merely going to be very good. In a program like Oklahoma State, their defense kind of let them down late in this game. Spencer Sanders dealing with some sort of clandestine injury, which we'll talk about when we talk about the line on that game with Texas coming up. He did not look right. There were rumors going around he wasn't going to play. He ended up playing. No one's really sure what's going on there. They don't really run the ball well. We talked about that on Thursday.
He was like their leading rusher, one of them, or one of the two leading rushers.
They don't really have the guy on the outside either to really break things down. So they just lost some guys, and they're still very good. They're just, it's now they're fighting an uphill battle. Although because the Big 12 is the dumbest league in America, they can very well get back to the Big 12 championship game, either rematch with TCU and beat them and then go to the Sugar Bowl. Very much possible, even though this is a league that plays a true round robin and there's no need for a conference championship game. But that kind of is what it is. The final game of the week that was a big game, or so we thought, Michigan 41, Penn State 17, a game that will be forever known in the lore of the Michigan-Penn State rivalry as the peanut butter and jelly game. If you are unaware of this story, you probably saw the video of the two teams scuffling at halftime, but there have been multiple reports that during said brawl at halftime, or skirmish, because it wasn't really a brawl, during said skirmish, the Penn State players were throwing complimentary peanut butter and jelly sandwiches at Michigan players. We could talk about how I don't think a sandwich makes a good food projectile. Peanut butter and jelly may be a little bit better than others.
Yeah, that sticks at least a little bit. Yeah,
like
there's a little
into something.
Adhesiveness.
Exactly. There's an adhesiveness where if you're going to use like a ham sandwich, you might need to put like a layer of condiment between each layer. But nevertheless, sandwich, not a great projectile. To peel back the curtain of my production process, I was going to turn this over to you and eat an Uncrustable while
I was gonna say I got one of those in the freezer.
But my local supermarket was out of Uncrustables today. I just eat Uncrustables regularly. I wasn't going to just buy it for the show itself. But nevertheless, Michigan kicks the ever-loving shit out of Penn State in this game. What were your takeaways?
Michigan is good. Like, that was a statement game, one that we were waiting to see from them. Also, Penn State is not. I thought kind of the Northwestern Rain Bowl game was a little bit of a fluky. It was a weird weather game. They couldn't really do anything. I thought the play calling was weird. There weren't really many creative ways to get the ball to Nicholas Singleton. Like, when you can't run the ball early, you have to figure out ways to get him the ball in different ways. They were not able to do that. And I thought JJ McCarthy was fine, but Donovan Edwards is like kind of coming back, proving he's healthy, being a true, 1A, not necessarily a 2 behind Blake Corum, proves Michigan has a really good running game. They have a really good offensive line, and the defense stood up against disappointing play calling, but a very talented running back. And I guess when you ask Sean Clifford to be a star quarterback, he's not going to be able to do that. So in your face, Phil, Sean Clifford sucks. It's kind of what happened.
He's not even here to defend himself.
I would say it to his face, and
I know you would, but
I'll text it to him right after. But yeah, just disappointed in Penn State and impressed by Michigan.
Yeah, this was one of those games where it was like, if this game had played out, or the first half rather had played out exactly the way it did, and it had taken place in Happy Valley, you're sitting here thinking maybe this is something that Penn State might be able to pull off an upset here, because there was nothing in that first half to suggest that they should have even been in that game. They got the big play from Clifford on the run that set up a touchdown. They got the pick six, and suddenly they had the lead, and it's like, well, this is a home game for Penn State. Maybe they can build off the energy of the crowd, whatever. This game was in the Big House, and even if it had been in Happy Valley, I don't know that would have changed a whole heck of a lot, because Michigan was the better team, and they just stepped on their throat in the second half of this game. The two things that you just need to know that tell you the entire story of this game: Michigan 418 rushing yards, and if you remove the long Sean Clifford run, Penn State just 2.3 yards per carry. In fact, if you remove explosive plays from Penn State's offense, it had a negative 0.49 EPA per play. So basically every non-explosive play, they were basically losing about half a point of expectation based on their expected, what they should have gotten from those plays. That's how dominant the Michigan defense was. They're awesome on defense. We know that. They're going to run the ball great. I mean, Donovan Edwards getting healthier and healthier is just huge for them. Him and Corum are awesome. But ultimately, it's like we're going to be in November, and we're never going to know what they have in JJ McCarthy. And we need to figure that out before they play Ohio State, because they can run the ball, and they're going to beat everyone else on their schedule. Like the Illinois game is going to be fascinating just to see how good, like where this Illinois program is, but they probably don't have the horses to run with Michigan. So I'm just kind of interested to see what that looks like. But we're still not entirely certain on JJ McCarthy. We're not going to find out for a while, and they're going to try to hide him as best that they can because they've got no reason to throw the ball. Like if you can just run the ball the way that this team can and just throw the ball when you absolutely need to and not put too much pressure on JJ McCarthy, why do it? Why even try? And that's what like they've done the last 2 years, and that's what they're going to keep doing. I think if anything, in kind of like a weird way, I think that Michigan continuing to show that they are probably the 4th or 5th best team in the country, depending on how you feel about Clemson, probably helps CJ Stroud's Heisman chances down the road in that game. That game is just going to be bigger and bigger and bigger. When we talk about revenge games and all that, but not much else to say. This is the time of year where you kind of start having to separate the contenders from the pretenders. And we found a contender on Saturday and a pretender in Penn State.
Yeah, I don't have much more on this game. You think we both kind of covered it here. You mentioned, you think Michigan's on par, maybe on par with Clemson. They're kind of at that level, which they established themselves to be closer to the, number 4, number 5 team in the nation, and they are the number 10 team in the nation. I would be so intrigued by a Michigan-Clemson matchup because I think that would be such strength on strength. Mm-hmm. I think that would be a really fun match. That's just a totally hypothetical matchup that there's a very, very slim chance we will see this season, but I would love to see that.
I don't know if there's a slim chance that we'll see it. I mean, I think it's actually like we're basically Clemson running the table in Michigan. We're basically those two teams running the table away from that happening, which Michigan just has to beat Ohio State, which is going to be very difficult to do.
Yeah.
But if that happens, you're probably going to end up with SEC champion number 1. You're basically going to probably see SEC versus SEC in some form or fashion, 1 versus 4. You might end up with Michigan being number 1 in the country. I'm kind of talking this out in my head. If Georgia runs the table, if Georgia, Clemson, and Michigan run the table, Clemson and Michigan will play each other in the playoff.
Yeah, probably.
If Georgia loses to Alabama, then probably not, because you'll probably get, or Tennessee runs the table. Hey, let's not discount that. But
yeah, don't discredit my Vols.
You need the SEC East champion to be undefeated, and then we might actually see it. I'm not holding my breath. That's going to happen. A few other odds.
What if Tennessee loses to Georgia like 31?
Are you going to do the?
I am.
Did I send you my Galaxy Brain Bo Nix take?
No, I'm scared of those words though.
What if Bo Nix is the reason why no Pac-12 team gets into the playoff and gets us 3 SEC teams into the playoff? The other thing that I've kind of wanted to talk about, and I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it, but this is one of the best times of the year in college football. So like the first month and a half of the season is like, who are the surprising teams in college football this year? Like Kansas was that team this year. Duke for a couple of weeks was that team this year. TCU right now, we're going to kind of find out, are TCU really a contender or are they just having a great season? The next couple of weeks are, let's go through all of the Galaxy Brain scenarios we can come up with for the playoff, the what if part of the season, which is, okay, well, if Georgia and Tennessee and Alabama all have 1 loss and Ohio State loses to Michigan and Clemson and blah, 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 what happens? And we do that for weeks and weeks and weeks, and then it ends up with Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, and Clemson in the playoff. Like, that's what happens. And
that's probably what's going to end up happening.
Yeah, I mean, that's what's going to happen, and that'll be a bummer and whatever else. But all of these hypotheticals are fun, and we'll probably get into that in a couple of weeks or maybe next week, or who knows? We'll see what happens as we get through this week. I don't want to get to the odds just yet, but this week's slate stinks. Nevertheless, a couple of other odds and ends. If you remember from the preseason, our Big 10, preview show, I said Illinois was a landmine, the kind of team that if you prepare for them and you're ready for them, you can avoid them and be fine. But if you don't, you're going to step on them and they're going to blow up your fucking season. I was wrong. This team is very good. They are very good. Are they a playoff contender? Absolutely not, but they are a very good team. They are the favorites in the West. The loss to Indiana.
How did they lose to Indiana?
That's going to go down as one of the weirdest losses of the season. That's why my theory of just throwing out week 1 results is valid. Minnesota had a negative 0.88 EPA per pass play in this game. Like every time they tried to throw the ball, they basically lost a point. Good defense, great running back, efficient quarterback. That's a recipe to win 8 or 9 games in just about any league, regardless of the talent. That said, how many points would you need to be getting to bet on Illinois against Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game?
28.5.
That's about where
I'm not kidding. 28.5. Maybe if you got me feeling real good, I could go with 24.5. But yeah, I would need I would need a football number and a hook. A
Um,
big football number.
a big football number and a hook.
But I mean, who'd have thought we're gonna in like 3 weeks? We're very likely going to have Purdue at Illinois for a Big Ten championship bid.
Yeah, like a Big Ten semifinal game. That's gonna be. It'll be interesting to see. All offense versus all defense should be interesting. The Dakota Marker game, I talked about it a little bit. Number 1, number 2, North Dakota State was up 21-7, threw a pick in the end zone, then get outscored 16-0 the rest of the game to lose for the third straight season to South Dakota State. So the Dakota Marker stays in Brookings, which of course is going to make it more hilarious when North Dakota State beats them in the playoffs. A spoiler alert for everyone listening at home. On Thursday, I'm not going to do a off the radar game. I am going to do here's a list of FCS games that you should keep an eye on / watch on Saturday, because there are legitimately almost as many interesting FCS games as there are FBS games. And then the last note, shout out. Were you familiar with the term dead cat bounce?
Yes.
Okay, so I blew Phil's mind because Phil had never heard the term dead cat bounce, but that's basically a temporary and unsustainable rebound in the market, and that is the Colorado Buffaloes. We are not going to have a winless team in college football this season as Colorado defeated Cal in overtime. Just a sad football game. I'm mad I didn't end up betting the under, which we had briefly discussed in that game on Thursday when we were kind of going through our
Really glad I did not take that prop on FanDuel. The under on Colorado.
So before we do our picks, we are halfway, or before we do the games, excuse me, we are halfway through the college football season. So I'm going to do some trivia with you about betting splits for the year. We are using the closing line, which might be a little bit of a tell here. There is one team that remains unbeaten against the spread in college football. Can you name that team?
What is it? A ranked team?
I think they're still ranked, but maybe not.
Okay, so they're a fringe ranked team, kind of.
Yes.
Wouldn't be Purdue.
Nope.
This is great radio.
Yeah.
Phil's not Florida State. They just didn't cover the spread. Syracuse.
It is not Syracuse. It is the team that we have talked about a lot, a team near and dear to you and me, the Kansas Jayhawks, 6-0-1 against the spread, covered by half a point against TCU, and then they pushed against TCU.
They covered against Oklahoma?
It ended up at 10. It closed at 10.5. It got all the way out to 10.5, and they lost by 10. Yeah,
I didn't realize that.
I was like, what the hell happened? Like, I was like, they lost by 10, and then I looked at the closing line, it was 10.5. Which is insane. So they pushed against TCU, covered by half a point against Oklahoma. There are 8 teams in college football that are 1-5 against the spread. The worst record, Colorado, one of them, got their first cover with an outright win on Saturday. Can you name any of the other 7, teams undefeated against the spread, or 1-5 against the spread?
1-5 against the spread. Colorado is one of them.
Yes, there are 7 more.
I don't know. Damn. Oklahoma?
That is incorrect.
That's a good guess, though. Good guess by me.
Yeah, they're probably... I'm not sure who Oklahoma... Oh, they covered against Nebraska, for sure. And then they probably covered...
Alabama?
No. The other 7 are Army, Boston College, Fresno State, Miami, San Diego State, SMU, and Virginia.
Miami would have been a team I threw up there eventually.
Yeah, Miami was certainly up there. Virginia, not surprising. A little surprising Virginia actually covered against anybody, but nevertheless. And then one team has not had an under hit this season. Can you guess who they are? All I will say is they are a team that has put up a lot of points in a lot of games.
James Madison.
That is incorrect, but the color scheme actually the same. Washington, the overs are 6-0-1. This season. Arkansas, Memphis, and Northern Illinois have had the overs hit in 6 of their 7 games, with 1 under hitting. And then one team in college football has not had a game go over the total this year. I will see what I can do to give you a clue, because I doubt you'll get it on your own. Although if you want to throw out a guess real quick, you can.
No, if you're telling me I'm not going to get it, you just tell me. Also, shout out me for the Washington overs. I took the over 72 just out of principle, and it hit. So like
I admit, like not even
you and
close.
Phil laughed when I bet that out of principle because I saw 72 total. But who's laughing now?
I mean, there's probably something to Washington against bad teams overs. The one team who has not had a game go, let me back up. It's one team who the under has hit in every game this season. There's a caveat: is Colorado State. The under has hit in all 6 of Colorado State's games. Not surprising because that team is bad. And then one team, other team has not had an over hit, which is Georgia Tech with 5 unders and a push. Also so we move on to Saturday. We have 9 games that I wrote down, and boy, is this slate stinky. We will start
with Big 12 games.
There are there's 3 really good. There's 3 interesting, very good games this week, and then everything else is kind of meh. Starting with a kind of meh game being the lone battle of unbeatens this week. Syracuse at Clemson, open 14.5. Clemson's a 13.5 point favorite. Man. The Syracuse has been like cheeky and cute and fun, and we love Sean Tucker and we love his tweets, but like
this is kind of where like
God, they're not that good.
They've had some weird things happen to like they got lucky and they got NC State without Devin Leary. They came back and won the Purdue game because Purdue kind of wrapped that game up and gave it back to them. Even like they should have won that game, and that was a weird spot. Like they're playing a really good football team now, and they don't get them in the Carrier Dome. They have to go to Clemson, and haven't they played all but one? The only road game they've played this year was at UConn. So
I'm not sure.
I believe that's the case. I think they've only played the one true road game at UConn this year. They're going to go into a really tough environment, and I would, I think Clemson laying the 13.5 will probably be on my card.
Interesting. I'm not sure if I can get there and trust Clemson, but I don't hate it. Kansas at Baylor opened Baylor 9.5, got as low as 7 before bouncing back up to 8.5. Another interesting game for our beloved Kansas Jayhawks as they fight for bowl eligibility against a Baylor team that's pretty good. This I just thought was going to be another interesting, like, there aren't bad games in the Big 12.
So this is at Baylor or at Kansas?
At Baylor. It's in Waco.
That's going to be tough for Kansas.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough one for them as well.
Interested to see their bounce back here because they are better than how they played at Oklahoma, but that's a tough loss, and you really kind of got knocked down. Like the TCU one, I feel like was even easier to stomach because you played really well. You're arguably the better team in that one, and you just kind of lost in a slugfest, whereas Oklahoma, you kind of went and got, kind of just got your ass kicked by a team that was really struggling. So I'm keeping an eye out to see how Kansas bounces back in that one. See the bounce back effort, see what the team's like against a good, not great Baylor team.
They necessarily got their ass kicked. I mean, they finally had the game where their defense just wasn't going to be able to hold up against a good team. And obviously Oklahoma's offense is very good when Dylan Gabriel was on the field. Put this on the list. I put a couple of mid-major G5 games on here in terms of just like games that are going to help us determine potential group of New Year's Six Bowl participants. Cincinnati on the road at SMU. Open 3, still 3. Ben Bryant for Cincinnati, their quarterback's dealing with a concussion. Luke Fickell confirmed that he has a concussion, will not confirm whether or not he is playing this week. But SMU hasn't been overly impressive this year, but it is a long road trip for Cincinnati, potentially without their quarterback. So at least if nothing else, a game to kind of keep your eye on and see if something weird happens, because SMU will at least be able or try to throw the ball around and put some points up. So that's going to be
I'm just always, whenever I see SMU and no Tanner Mordecai is playing, I just for some reason think they're going to drop 45 points, and that just hasn't seemed to be the case this year. But if Cincinnati's without the quarterback, that's going to be a tough one for them on the road against a veteran quarterback and while they haven't been wildly impressive this year or as impressive as we thought they might be an SMU team, it's still a pretty solid SMU team that can put up points.
The undercard in the Big 12, I guess technically we count as the undercard in Stillwater, Texas, on the road, survived a nervy game against Iowa State that they played pretty poorly in, but they also would have lost that game every year for the last 5 years, 10 years. So at least they won that game. They survived. They head to Stillwater against Oklahoma State, licking their wounds rather off the loss to TCU. It opened Texas -1. It's out to 6.5. A well-known college football handicapper gave out Texas. That moved this line some, but it bounced from 4 to 6.5 yesterday.
That has to be the Sanders injury, right?
Yeah, Mike Gundy's just did this whole rant yesterday about how he's not going to talk about injuries. There's no benefit to talking about injuries, and whatever, dude, Texas is going to prepare for Spencer Sanders. Like, the thing you do is you say Spencer Sanders is playing and then you don't play him. Like, you say, oh, he's definitely going to play, and then you don't play him. There's no penalty for doing that. But everyone knows he's hurt. Everyone knows he's banged up. So nobody knows how banged up, but at least a 6.5 point spread for Texas as a road favorite would seem to indicate that Spencer Sanders is not going to play in this game.
It would, but wouldn't be the first time that we've seen lines that indicate somebody's not going to play this year and then they end up playing. Whether that was, the one that really sticks out with me was the Aiden O'Connell Minnesota game where line was definitely he was playing and he plays. I don't know. It's going to be a no touch for me until I figure out who's at quarterback. If you get a fully healthy Oklahoma State team, I think that could be a really fun game that turns into a shootout. And if you don't have a fully healthy Spencer Sanders, whether he's banged up and playing or not playing at all, that's one Texas should win by a couple scores.
And I guess interesting one down in Death Valley. We thought it was going to be interesting 2 weeks ago. It was not, but this time it is Ole Miss bringing their undefeated season down to take on your guy Brian Kelly and LSU. LSU opened a 2.5 point favorite and still a 1.5 point favorite against an undefeated Ole Miss team. I don't know. I mean, LSU scored touchdowns, I think, on their first 5 or 6 possessions against Florida, then tried to give the game away and didn't. Ole Miss's defense has not been good the last couple of weeks after starting off very well.
Very unimpressed with them last weekend against Auburn.
Yeah, they also had a chance to kind of blow Auburn out of the water and let Auburn back into that game. So interesting, like maybe we're buying a little high on LSU after they looked very, very good. And Jaden Daniels was awesome against Florida and Ole Miss was unimpressive. But man, LSU, like it's going to be hard for me to shake them getting just absolutely stomped 40-13 at home by Tennessee, who is better than Ole Miss. But
I want to take Ole Miss, and I think that should be a no-brainer with them getting points, but I haven't been all that impressed with them either this year.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Like their signature win is the Kentucky or the Kentucky one. Even that, like they tried to give the game back to Kentucky. Like they should have lost the football game. I don't know. This is a big spot for them. I need to see, like, they're undefeated, but I don't think twice about them being a playoff contender because I don't think they haven't looked at all like it. Like they're skating by not very good teams. And I think can they skate by LSU on the road? Yeah, they can, but LSU's not all that good of a football team. At least not right now. I probably lean towards taking points with Ole Miss, but I hate it. I think I just hate this game.
Yeah, it's a strange one. It's an interesting game.
It's interesting to watch. I don't hate the game itself. I would hate betting on the game.
Gotcha. That's fair.
Sorry.
Interested
in watching it.
The best game of the day on paper, anyway. Undefeated UCLA hitting the road for the first time this year because Colorado under Carl Durrell doesn't count as a road game to take on Oregon. Oregon opened a 4-point favorite. Kind of mad I didn't jump on that when it opened. It's now out to 6.5. My personal opinion on this is that there's part of me that thinks that even though UCLA's offense is very good and maybe Oregon's not quite as great as they've looked recently, these are two teams that are very good on offense, and my handicap of this, without having done a ton of all my research, which I probably do the next couple of days, UCLA hitting the road at Autzen in a game that is going to be very, very intense and going to have a very loud, raucous Oregon crowd. Not the best spot to play your first legit road test.
Mm-hmm. This is the Utah win was nice for them. It was a very good win at home against a solid football team. But this is the first true, all right, if you're legit, you win this football game. Maybe not win, but if you're legit, this is a close football game. You maybe win, or if you lose, whatever, in a close back and forth battle that you don't that Oregon doesn't let you back in, that's fine. But I think UCLA is a good football team. But if they're a truly good football team that's going to compete for a Pac-12 title, need to see something from them in this one. Need to see them prove that they can go onto the road and handle it, because not only have they not played really on the road, but they haven't really even played in a loud environment at home.
Yeah, they haven't played in front of a crowd.
And I'm not trying to take low hanging fruit shots at their crowd. We know it's the second team in LA, and the stadium's 30 minutes from campus, and Californians don't go to a ton of sporting events all that much anyways. They haven't even been in a raucous home environment yet where the crowd's behind them. So it's an interesting game.
Yeah, I agree. Mississippi State at Alabama, open 20.5, still 20.5. Not sure what Mississippi State did to draw the short end of the stick every freaking year, 2019, Alabama lost to LSU in the regular season. Their next game against Mississippi State, kicked the shit out of them then. Last year, they lost to Texas A&M. Their next game, Mississippi State, they kicked the shit out of them then. Now, once again, following a loss. Now, granted, both of those losses, I think LSU was a 5-point loss, A&M a 3-point loss last year. This is a 3-point loss. Now they return home angry, and they get Mississippi State again. Mississippi State should just call the conference commissioner and say, can we play them after they play an FCS team or be their conference opener or something at this point? Nevertheless, Alabama just under a 3-touchdown favorite against the Bulldogs, who are coming off of a loss to Kentucky.
Yeah, disappointed by Mississippi State in that effort. I thought that was like not that they were totally different from years past, but I thought that this was it played well enough and played against like good defenses, one in A&M, that they kind of lit up. Not that A&M is a very good football team, but the defense is solid, and they played really well against them. I don't know if it was like a letdown finding out Will Levis was actually going to play, and they were expecting him not to early in the week, but it just kind of no-showed against a Kentucky team that I'm still not totally fully impressed with. And yeah, I mean, you're going to get a very angry Alabama team, and if Bryce Young plays the way he did against Tennessee, Alabama's going to put up 50-plus points and almost at Ole Miss. Mississippi State is not going to be able to keep up with them.
And Mississippi State has tended to struggle against Alabama's pass rush in recent years. And after Alabama's pass rush has been really ineffective at a lot of times this season, that was the breakout game for Will Anderson last year.
Seems like a get-right spot for that pass rush.
Yeah, it just feels like a get-right spot for that pass rush, which, I mean, Mississippi State had a first-round tackle last year, and they still couldn't block Alabama's pass rush. They don't have that guy anymore. Charles Cross is gone. Seems like a little bit of a dicey spot. Another game I don't have an opinion on, but put it on here because it's just, again, we talk about this, talk about the group of five, and we love the group of five and small conferences around here. A game that's probably going to determine a participant in what is going to be a really stinky Mountain West Conference Championship game. Boise State and Air Force. Air Force at home opened a 1-point favorite. They are now out to a 3-point favorite. After they lost to someone recently, I don't remember who it was off the top of my head. They are probably out of the running for the top group of five in a New Year's Six Bowl. But nevertheless, Air Force and Boise State playing a pivotal game in a group of five conference. So we will at least give them a little bit of a mention here on the Blogger Bowl.
Yeah, haven't watched a ton of either team this year. Well, I watched what I can. I watched a little bit of that Boise State, Oregon State game early on in the year. I'm in almost full fade Boise State mode because it seems like every time I bet on them, they end up screwing me over. And I've liked Air Force this year. So Air Force 3-point home favorite. I'll probably ride with the Falcons.
So in an interesting kind of twist, Boise State fired their offensive coordinator, which then led to their starting quarterback entering the transfer portal. And they have scored 35 and 40 points in their next two games without him. A lot of that is because they are just running the hell out of the ball. They ran for 316 yards and 6.1 yards per carry against Fresno State at home a couple of weeks ago. So, hey, maybe if you have good players, and George Holani, their lead running back's a really good player. So, like, maybe do that. That seems like a good play. So I'm guessing, just like kind of looking at it, I'm guessing an under kind of game because I think both teams are just going to try to
run the damn ball.
Yeah. And then the nightcap, the only like primetime game worth a damn, the big game of the day in the Big 12, Kansas State hitting the road to take on TCU. TCU opened a 6-point favorite. Another spread that I wish I had jumped on, the visitors 4, because it is now down to 3.5. My only kind of instinct / take on this right now is Kansas State coming off a bye feels like it might matter when TCU has been playing a lot of close, tough games lately.
Yeah, like not just close games, like good football games against tougher opponents. And I love TCU's offense, and I'm not sure Kansas State can keep up with it when it's firing on all cylinders like it has been the last couple weeks. But if you have the bye week to just prepare for that, and you have a lot of tape to go off, I would have loved to grab Kansas State at the 6.5, the 3.5. I get a little bit scared. But that's just going to be a really, really fun football game, and kind of weird that like that game's for. Would that game be for front runner in the Big 12 at this point?
Yeah, I mean they're both undefeated in conference.
Yeah, both because Kansas State's losses to Tulane. So that's.
I'm going to end the show talking about Tulane, by the way.
It's not a shot at Tulane. It's just more of a game. If you look back at Kansas State, you wish you would have won. But yeah, it's hard to believe that this far into the season that we're talking about first place in the Big 12 is on the line between TCU and Kansas State. But here we are.
Yeah, I wonder if position of the bye week might be an ultimate determining factor in the Big 12 title race, because there's only one bye week during the season, because basically everyone is scheduled for a bye week the last week of because they don't play on championship Saturday rather. So basically everyone gets a one bye week, and TCU had theirs on September 17th. I believe that was the same day Oklahoma State had their bye week. So TCU plays straight through to the end of the season. They play Kansas State this week. Then next Saturday, they are at West Virginia. Then they play home to Texas Tech. November 12th, they're at Texas. The 19th at Baylor. Then they close with Iowa State. Kansas State had their bye week last week. If Texas can get through can get through Oklahoma State on Saturday, they have their bye week next week, which is a chance to rest and get ready for some of their games down the stretch. I mean, they've got a really tough schedule too, but just kind of wonder if that's what's going to matter there. So that's all I have. It's just, like I said, the 9 games, because all of the slate kind of stinks this week, but that's fine. We'll get a couple of interesting results. We'll kind of get to see if Syracuse is really worth paying attention to the rest of the season, and some really big Big 12 games, and obviously a really, really exciting Pac-12 game. The Pac-12 game of the year, although I don't know if it's going to be able to top what happened in Salt Lake City on Saturday.
Yeah, no, I don't. It might be the most important game to date, but I don't think what we see on the field is going to top that, because that was
awesome.
Man, it's rare that all the big games like that, not just Alabama, Tennessee, but like all 3 of them lived up to the hype, came down to the wire.
Yeah, Michigan, Penn State was a dud, but that is what it is. That happens, and you had 3 games that were great. Mentioned the Dakota Marker game, which was number 1 versus number 2 in FCS, which was awesome. I brought up Grand Valley State and Ferris State in this spot on Tuesday. That I think was a 1-point game. So a lot of great football around the country. You brought up Tulane, and I meant to put them at the end of my list, but shout out to Willie Fritz and Tulane football ranked for the first time since. Do you have any idea when the last time Tulane football was ranked?
I have no idea.
Tulane football has not been ranked since 1998, when they finished the season ranked 7th in the country.
I would not have guessed that. I would have said some point in the 2000s, the early 2000s, they would have had a team.
They were not. They finished the season undefeated. They were basically Central Florida before Central Florida, claiming national championships. Sean King, their quarterback, who you probably remember from his days with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So shout out to Tulane. There was a lot of debate about the future of Willie Fritz, a guy who a lot of people thought was a really good coach. Obviously, they haven't been ranked since 1998. That is a tough place to win, and they have done it. And look, they have a couple of more winnable games, and then I think they play, their last 3, and I think might be SMU, UCF, and Cincinnati. So obviously it gets very tough. But
go get your wins while you can, guys.
But we sit here, they are bowl eligible already, and as we sit here on October 18th, they technically control their own destiny for a New Year's Six bowl, because if they finish with 1 loss and win the American Athletic Conference, they will be in that game. But if that happens, that would be very surprising. Nevertheless, shout out to Tulane, the Angry Wave, one of the best logos in all of college football, if not the best logo. And oh, by the way, the last thing I will say before I wrap this, if you haven't seen it, go look at the helmets that the Buffalo Bulls are wearing on Saturday. They are wearing throwback helmets, and they are awesome.
I love a good throwback uniform.
You got anything else that you want to add?
I got nothing. We'll see you guys on Thursday with some actual bets and some game breakdowns.
Yeah, we will be back to break down the big games of the week, our under the radar games, in which I will talk a lot about FCS football. And like Matt said, our cards and a prize picks entry. So Phil probably not going to be around on Thursday, as the job continues to he adjusts to a new way of life with his new job. We hope that is going well. We miss him, and hopefully he can join us again soon. But Matt and I will be back on Thursday to break that down, and we will talk to you then.